All right, so 80, 91, 90, 51, 75, 83, twice, and 80, 90. Oh, dang, it's not like reading the zero. It's annoying. I'm definitely gonna have to double check this. 295.
So the zeros you still got to put them in, right?
Correct. Correct. Very important. I'm going to double check Aruski here. All right. Barring anything catastrophic, I think, shockingly, I may have typed that incorrectly. So I'll detail my steps here. I'll do the key press history. All right, so you have your data in. That's going to be so commonplace before this is all over that that's not anything you're going to need instruction on, because you're going to type data in repeatedly before this course is over. So hit second mode to quit out of there, so that you don't accidentally overwrite some numerical value that you typed in. Now we want to see a graphical display. Now we're doing this to more or less verify our work, but there are ways in which you could use this technique to actually do the work for you. It'll come up with the values that make essentially your frequency table, and from there you can make your frequency histogram. It's just you have to kind of understand the language of the calculator a little bit in order to really flesh this out. What you're going to do is hit second y equals, and that brings you into stat plots. Second y equals. Now they should all be off if you have a new calculator. If the calculator's been used before, it may not say that. The one that's highlighted in red right here? Okay, it's a second followed by the y equals t. Anytime you want to produce a graph of any kind, it's happening through this button. It's just a question of whether you're hitting second first. You can see right above it in blue, it says stat plot. That's where we want to be. All right. Now, in this menu, you see you have plot 1, plot 2, and plot 3. Then it says plots off. Right? That's a command to turn all the plots off. Right below that, if you scroll down, there's one to turn them all on. I don't see the need for something like that, but maybe you'll find use for it. If they all say off, then you're in good shape. If plot 2 or 3 say on, then we're going to want to turn those off at some point. So we can deal with that in a few minutes. So hit enter on plot 1. You could either hit enter or you could just hit the number 1. It doesn't matter. I'll hit enter. Now, you can look at this menu and you see a lot of different types of graphs here. We'll learn how to do all of these graphs before it's all over. Believe it or not, these two guys, the boxy looking ones, also known as box plots, it's on our list of things to do. We actually already know how to come up with the numbers that are necessary to create a box plot. Those values, the quartiles that we use to come up with the outlier calculations, that's what you need in order to create a box plot. So we know the math behind it already, so now we definitely want a shortcut for something like that. But if you had to take a guess of which one we're working with here, odds are this is the one you're going to guess, right? This looks like a histogram. So I'm going to hit on. So enter on the word on. So now on is highlighted. Hit the down arrow. That puts you into the different types. The default setting is a scatter plot. That's something for later. Hit the right arrow till you get to the one that looks like a histogram and hit enter. Me too. So the X list, L1, that makes sense, right? We had some values, we typed them into L1. Frequency 1, that's telling us that each one of the values that we typed into L1 happens once. Right? Sometimes you wrote them in there repeatedly, but that's all right. You're saying that they're happening exactly once. I could change that if every number for some reason happened twice. I could make that a 2. If I had a frequency table that was given to me, a list of X values, not intervals, but a list of X values and a list of frequencies, then I may want to change this to L2 so that the calculator could recognize that it is a frequency table. But as it stands right now, we have a raw list of data, and that's how it's mostly going to be. This is perfect setting. So what we want to do is we want to actually produce this graph. So the way we handle that is by hitting zoom. You don't want to just hit graph. All right, so I'll stop anybody who's thinking about going that route. The least useful key on this graphing calculator is the one that says graph on it. All right, because that's going to take you to a window based on a previous graph that you created, which may have absolutely nothing to do with the data that you're working with. You know, so maybe the last thing you did was maybe you created the graph of a line in an algebra class. Is that window going to be useful for this data set that goes up to 100? Absolutely not. So we go to zoom. We have a better option here. If you scroll down to option 9, zoom stat. What that'll do is it'll create a window based on the data that you typed in. So you've activated the graph. The calculator knows to reference that graph, the data that it's pointing to, and come up with an appropriate window. So hit enter or just a number 9, and now you have a histogram. Right? It may not be the right histogram, but it's a histogram. All right, so this is where we start. Coming up with the right histogram would be the next part of the process. So let me get this in the notes. So type data in L1. Always the first one. Sure.
I did the same steps and I keep sounding quick. Go back.
Go to option 2. You have a little funky business there. Clear that out. Now hit zoom 9. No problem. So just a general rule of thumb, if you ever get an error message and it gives you an option to go to, they don't, all the error messages don't say go to. Most of them just say quit. But every now and then you get one, a syntax error specifically, that says go to. Always select go to, because that'll go to the scene of the crime, at which point you could say, oh, that's the mistake. Maybe it's not obvious even when you go to the scene of the crime, but at least you're in the right neighborhood. If you're going to figure out where the mistake is, it'd be nice to be where the mistake is. You would have to, I would say, start the process again. Yeah, because if you select go to, it brings you somewhere and it's not obvious what the error is, then that's an issue. The most common error is when somebody go to put in like a -2, and they use a minus sign instead of a negative sign. That's not always obvious when you go to that. You say, it says -2, it looks right. If you train yourself to think, okay, is that the right kind of negative? Let's try the other one. That's going to fix a lot of the issues. All right. So this created a histogram. It may not be the best type of histogram. All right. It may not be the one that matches what you did on paper. It may not be the one that you want. So what I want to do is make an adjustment here. All right. I want it to have the same kind of window or the same kind of intervals that the graph I produced has. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the window key. And I'll take you through that in a second. All right, that's where the magic's going to happen. All right, so we hit window. And we have a lot of stuff here. Not all of which is necessary to mess around with. There's actually only one thing that you need to really look at. And that is the X scale. Right? X scale is telling us what each bar is worth in terms of an interval. So each bar is 20 units wide. Well, my histogram, the one that I created on paper, has bars that are 10 units wide on the interval. Right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my X scale. Instead of having it as 20, I'm going to make that 10. All right. So let me get that in. All right. So this should be the same as your interval width. All right. We decided to go by tens. That should be a 10. So now, this is like the only situation where hitting the graph key would make any sense. Because if I go back to zoom stat, it's going to take me back to the same viewing window that I had before. If you manually edit your window, then that's your only license to hit the graph key. So just think of it this way. Before you ever even think about hitting graph, ask yourself, did I change anything? Did I personally change anything in the window? No, stay away from the graph key. Yes, now I can hit the graph key. That's your license. And that's what my graph looks like. All right, so then from there, like I said, we hit graph. Now, just based on the shape here, I mean, you could count tick marks if you want, assuming each tick mark is worth 1 unit on the Y scale. I mean, it says it here that they are. Each tick mark is 1 unit. That means that this is 1, 1, 1, 0, 1, up to 3, 0, 3, 4, 4, 2. 1, 1, 1, 0, 1, 3, 0, 3, 4, 4, 2. Definitely looks nicer in this graph than it did in this piece of garbage that I created, but it's the same thing. It's at least verifying it. Now, if your scale is not as obvious, what do? Excellent question. What you would do is hit trace, because the trace key is going to tell us 2 things. And this is where the calculator can do all of the work for you, rather than using it to check your work. Because we just use it to check our work. I looked at the picture. It looks kind of like the picture I produced on paper. So I'm good there. But what if I didn't want to make the table myself? I just wanted to create the graph and have the appropriate intervals. How can I do that? The trace key is how you do that. Right? If I hit the trace key, it's giving me minimum, 0, maximum, less than 10. All right? So let's think about what that means. So we hit the trace key. All right. So I'm working with only whole number values here. So that's something to keep in mind. This right here is telling me that I'm working with the interval of 0 to less than 10. So that's an x interval of 0 to less than 10. The n value, which corresponds to the height, that's the number of values that fall in that interval. That's the frequency. Now, I said 0 to 9. The calculator is saying 0 to less than 10. We're essentially talking about the same thing, right? I mean, we're only dealing with a whole number of values. If there were decimal values involved, then it is conceivable that 0 to less than 10 could be different than what I have, because 0 to less than 10 could be 0 to 9.999. You know, you could have some decimal values in there. But this gets the job done. You can actually translate this based on the nature of the data to just say 0 to 9. Or you could write it as 0 to less than 10. You could write it the way the calculator is saying. Either way is acceptable. So that only gave us one interval. How do we get the rest? It's the right arrow. Now we got another one. So this says 10 to less than 20. With one value. So based on the trend, we would have 20 to less than 30, 30 to less than 40, 40 to less than 50, and so on. Oops. One, 10. So now, once you get a handle on that, it's just a matter of hitting the right arrow repeatedly and taking note of what the n values are. 1, 1, 1, 0, 1, 3, 0, 3, 4, 4, 2. Now, I did a lot of writing here, but you got to remember, with these calculator tricks, shortcuts, you're not writing all this stuff down. You're not even writing this down. You're getting the graph on your calculator, and then you're going right to the L graph. Putting these on the x-axis, you recognize that your highest number is a 4, so you start labeling your y-axis, and then you just start drawing bars. All right, so all of that background work is not happening. That's the thing I need you to understand, because you look at this and say, well, this took way longer than doing it by hand. It's quicker to do it by hand. Well, not really. Because I could give you a completely unique data set. I'll just do it in a different list. I'll do mine in L2. We just really need something to look at, so I'll just pop in some raw data. And I want to get a sense of what the graph looks like, so what I would do is I would just tell the calculator where to find the data. I put it in L2. Do the zoom 9. That gets me going in the right direction. Yeah. It gives me maybe a window that I don't want. My X scale, the calculator decided that my interval should be 12.25 units wide. So I say, calculator, you're not using your head. I want to go by tens. So I change it to 10, and I hit graph. Now I have this. Just hit trace. 51 to 61 is my first interval. 51 to, 51 to less than 61. 61 to less than 71. This is what's going down on paper, and that's it. Right? Much quicker. But entirely up to you. but I had that at L1. That's a long history. All right, it does take a little practice to get the hang of, but it's worth it, I think. All right, because you're saving yourself from having to write all this stuff down. All right, so on to the box plot.